It was supposed to be a funeral, not a beginning. Yet there I was, standing in the graveyard with mud on my shoes, when he walked into my life like some cruel joke from fate. The kind of joke that makes you laugh at first, then bleed. The September sky stretched gray over the town of Willows Creek. The kind of sky that pressed on your chest and made breathing feel like a sin. My mother's casket had just been lowered. Prayers mumbled over her body by a pastor who didn't even know her name without glancing at the paper in his hand. People came, nodded, and left in a hurry, as if grief was contagious. But he stayed. Ethan Rivers. The boy everyone warned me about when I was 12. The boy with the golden hair, too many freckles, and a laugh that could stir up gossip faster than any preacher's sermon. The boy who had left this town 3 years ago, running from the same whispers that now circled me like vultures. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than the crunch of leaves under his boots. "I'm sorry about your mom." I wanted to ignore him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something, anything, just to prove I was still alive. Instead, my eyes betrayed Methy soaked him in. The faded denim jacket, the hands shoved nervously in his pockets, the kind of sadness that mirrored my own. "Why are you here?" My voice cracked like glass. He looked at me with those earnest blue eyes. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." And just like that, the world shifted. Ethan had once been the scandal of Willows Creek. Small towns had long memories. And his sin was simple. He loved differently. He kissed a boy behind the bleachers once. And by Monday morning everyone knew. Parents whispered. Teachers frowned. His father called him a mistake. By junior year, Ethan had disappeared. Now he was back. And I was broken enough to notice him. We walked away from the cemetery together. The town felt even smaller, that day-clapboard houses leaning into each other. American flags drooping in the breeze. Cracked sidewalks carrying the weight of too many secrets. Everyone pretended not to stare as we passed. I felt their eyes. I always did. Ethan must have felt it too. But he just shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. "Do you want company?" he asked. I should have said no. My chest was still a battlefield. My mother had been the last thread tying me to this place. And now she was gone. But the silence of my house terrified me more than the stares of strangers. So I said yes. Grief made everything heavy. The walls of my house, the air in my lungs, even the coffee mugs in the sink. Ethan walked through the door like he belonged there, though he hadn't stepped foot in this neighborhood in years. He didn't pity me. He didn't talk too much. He just sat at the kitchen table while I tried to remember how to breathe. "You're not okay," he said finally, breaking the silence. I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Wow, thanks for the diagnosis." But he didn't flinch. "I'm not either." Something in his voice cut deeper than any sermon or sympathy card. He didn't have to explain. We were both cracked open by life. Different wounds, but the same bleeding. That night, I let him stay. The days that followed blurred together, like watercolors left out in the rain. Grief has no respect for time. Some mornings, I woke up angry enough to tear my room apart. Other mornings, I couldn't even lift my head from the pillow. Through it all, Ethan stayed. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door. He made me eat something besides black coffee and stale bread. He sat with me on the porch at night, watching the fireflies as if they could stitch our broken pieces back together. Sometimes he smiled, and it was like sunlight cracking through storm clouds. Sometimes he cried when he thought I wasn't looking, shoulders trembling in the half-dark. I wanted to ask him about the boy he had kissed, about why he came back to this town that hated him. about whether the rumors were true that his father had thrown him out, that he had slept in his car for weeks before leaving. But I didn't. Not yet. One night, I finally broke. The memories came like a flood. My mom's laugh, her hands, her voice, all of it slipping away like sand through my fingers. Couldn't hold it. Couldn't hold her. I ended up on the kitchen floor, sobbing into my knees, the kind of ugly sound you never want anyone to hear. And Ethan didn't say a word. He just sat down beside me, pulled me into his arms, and held me like I wasn't broken glass. Let it out, he whispered, his breath warm against my hair. I've got you. I clung to him like drowning men cling to driftwood. For the first time since the funeral, I felt the faintest spark of life. But sparks are dangerous in small towns like ours. It started with whispers. I saw them at the diner. I heard them at the gas station. That's him, the Rivers boy, back already, and now hanging around with Michael Carter. Poor kid, just buried his mom. And now this. By Sunday morning, the whispers had turned into glares. Church. The pastor preached about sin with fire in his eyes. My name wasn't mentioned, but I could feel it carved into every word. Afterward, one of the elders pulled me aside. Michael, he said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. I know you're hurting. Don't let grief lead you astray. People are talking. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him grief wasn't leading me astray, it was leading me to the only person who understood. But instead, I nodded, because that's what good boys in Willows Creek were supposed to do. Ethan saw right through me. That night, sitting on the porch, he lit a cigarette and handed me one, even though I'd never smoked in my life. You're scared, he said simply. Of what? Of being seen with me. The truth burned worse than the smoke in my lungs. I didn't answer. That was the night everything cracked open. Why did you come back? I asked him finally, my voice low. Why put yourself through this again? He exhaled a cloud of smoke, watching it fade into the night. Because this is my home, too. And I'm tired of running. I stared at him, the weight of his words pressing into my chest. I had spent my whole life bending under the weight of other people's expectations, carrying their judgments like a cross. And here was Ethan scarred, beaten down, but unbroken. Maybe that was why I couldn't stop looking at him, why I couldn't stop wanting him. The first time our hands brushed, it felt accidental. The second time, it didn't. By the third time, when his fingers laced with mine on the porch swing, I stopped pretending it was anything but inevitable. And when he leaned in, when his lips touched mine with the gentleness of someone afraid to break me, I didn't pull away. I kissed him back like I'd been waiting my whole life. The fireflies glowed brighter that night. But so did the eyes watching from across the street. The morning after our first kiss, the air felt different. Maybe it was only inside me, but I swore the world had shifted, just slightly, as if God himself had tilted it toward something I couldn't name yet. Ethan was still asleep on the porch swing, his head tilted back, hair a mess of golden strands catching the first rays of dawn. I sat there watching him, half in awe, half in terror, because nothing in Willows Creek stayed secret for long. And last night we had given the town something to chew on for years. I wanted to wake him, to whisper the kind of words I'd only ever said in the silence of my own head. But fear is a cruel thing, it ties your tongue in knots. So instead, I just let him sleep, and prayed that the day wouldn't swallow us whole. The town didn't wait long. By noon, whispers had grown teeth. At the grocery store, Mrs. Callahan paused in the baking aisle just to look me up and down before walking away. At the diner, a couple of old men stopped mid-conversation when I walked in, their coffee cups hovering in the air like props in a bad play. And at church, God, Chiquit was worse. Pastor Graham's sermon that Sunday wasn't about love, or forgiveness, or compassion. It was about abominations, about fire and brimstone, about how some sins spread like disease if the righteous didn't cut them out quick enough. Every word felt like a nail being hammered into my chest. Ethan didn't come with me that morning, but when I got back, he was waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. One for him, one for me. He handed it over without asking, without prying, like he knew what kind of storm I just walked through. They're going to come after us, I whispered, fingers tight around the mug. They already are, he said calmly, leaning back against the railing. Then he looked at me, blue eyes burning with something fierce. The question is, are you going to let them win? I didn't know how to answer that, because part of me wanted to be brave, to hold his hand in the middle of town and dare anyone to stop us. But another part of bigger part was still that scared little boy sitting in church pews, swallowing every word about sin and shame, trying not to let his heart betray him. That night, I lay awake, listening to Ethan breathe beside me. I thought about my mom, about how she had raised me alone after my dad left, how she'd worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. She hadn't been perfect, but she had always wanted one thing for me, a good, honest life. Would she have wanted this? The thought tore me in two. The next day, Ethan drove me out to the river. It was the same river we used to ride our bikes to as kids. The same one where we'd skipped stones until our arms ached. Only now, felt different, wilder, freer. He parked the truck, grabbed a cooler from the back, and set it down on the bank. "What are we doing?" I asked. He grinned. "Living. You should try it sometime." We spent the afternoon there, eating sandwiches that tasted like cardboard and laughing about nothing. For a few hours, it was easy to forget the world outside the riverbank existed. Easy to forget the stares, the whispers, the sermons. At one point, Ethan stripped off his shirt and dove into the water, surfacing with a triumphant grin. His skin glistened in the sunlight, droplets running down the lines of his shoulders, his chest. "Come on," he called. "You're not scared, are you?" I rolled my eyes, but when I finally waded in after him, the cold water stole my breath. He swam circles around me, laughing when I tried and failed to splash him back. For a moment, I wasn't grieving, or hiding, or fighting. I was just alive, and that was enough. But joy never lasts long in Willows Creek. That night, someone spray-painted a word across my garage door. Faggot. Big, bold, dripping red letters. I stood there staring at it, my throat dry, my fists clenched. It wasn't just paint. It was a message, a warning. Ethan stood beside me, silent. Then he pulled the keys from his pocket and said, "We're not running." I turned to him, anger and fear crashing together inside me. "And what, Ethan? We stay and let them burn us down." His jaw tightened. "If we run now, they win. Again. And I'm done losing." The next few weeks were war. Not the kind with guns or soldiers, but the kind with whispers, with glances, with doors slammed in your face. The kind where every trip to the store felt like a battlefield, where every step down Main Street carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations. But through it all, Ethan stayed by my side. He held my hand when I thought I'd break. He reminded me to eat when I forgot. He kissed me in the dark when the world outside felt too heavy to bear. And slowly, quietly, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I was afraid of losing him. One night, I finally told him. We were sitting on the porch again, fireflies drifting lazily in the humid air. I turned to him, my chest aching with words I couldn't hold back anymore. I'm scared, I whispered. He frowned. Of what? Of losing you. Of losing the only thing that makes me feel alive. Ethan's hand found mine in the dark. His thumb brushed across my knuckles. Gentle, steady. You're not going to lose me, he said. Not unless you push me away. Something broke open in me then. All the fear, all the grief, all the shame, I let it fall, piece by piece, until the only thing left was the truth. I love you, I said, the words trembling out of me like fragile glass. For a heartbeat, he just stared at me. Then he leaned in, pressing his forehead against mine, and whispered, I've been waiting 3 years to hear that. When he kissed me, it wasn't tentative like before. It was desperate, fierce, alive. It was everything I'd been too scared to want. But if love was a flame, the town was ready with buckets of water. The next Sunday, Pastor Graham's sermon went beyond words. He named names. Mine. Ethan's. He warned parents to keep their children away from us. He called us wolves in sheep's clothing. Dangerous. Unnatural. And for the first time, I stood up. The whole church turned when I rose from the pew, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might kill me. My voice shook, but it carried. You don't know me, I said, staring at the pastor. And you don't know him, but you stand up here and preach hate in the name of love. My mother believed in God. She believed in kindness. She would never have stood for this. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered my name. Someone else told me to sit down. But I didn't. I walked out, and Ethan was waiting for me outside, leaning against his truck, a proud smile tugging at his lips. When I reached him, he pulled me into his arms, right there in front of the church, in front of everyone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care who saw. That night, we made love. It wasn't hurried, or ashamed, or stolen. It was tender, careful, like two broken pieces finally finding the shape they were meant to make together. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets, Ethan whispered, We're going to be okay. And for the first time, I almost believed him. But Willows Creek wasn't done with us yet. One evening, as we walked back from the diner, headlights flared behind us. A truck slowed, voices shouting from the open windows, words sharp as knives. Faggots, queers, mistakes. Then came the beer can, hurled fast and hard. It hit Ethan across the temple, sending him stumbling to the ground. I dropped beside him, blood rushing down his face, my hands shaking as I tried to stop it. The truck roared away into the night, laughter echoing in its wake. I held Ethan close, my heart breaking all over again. And in that moment, I knew love wasn't just something we whispered in the dark. It was something we had to fight for, with everything we had. The hospital smelled like bleach and fear. I sat in the waiting room with blood on my shirt, Ethan's blood, while the fluorescent lights hummed above me like they were mocking every prayer I'd ever whispered. The nurse at the desk kept giving me looks. Not unkind, but not kind either. That same polite distance people wore when they didn't quite know what to do with you. I wanted to scream at her, at all of them, at this town that seemed built on silence and judgment. When the doctor finally came out, my knees nearly buckled. "He's stable," the man said, pulling off his gloves. "A few stitches. Mild concussion. But he'll be all right." The relief hit me so hard I almost cried right there. "You can see him now." I pushed open the door to find Ethan lying pale against the hospital bed, a bandage above his temple. His eyes fluttered open when he heard me, and that crooked grin tugged at his lips. Guess I should have ducked. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I grabbed his hand and held it against my chest. "Don't you dare joke about this." He squeezed my fingers weakly. "I'm still here, Michael. They didn't win." But I wasn't so sure. Word spread fast. Of course. By morning, half the town knew Ethan had been jumped. Some claimed it was boys just blowing off steam. Others muttered that we'd brought it on ourselves. A handful of voices quiet, but firm said it was wrong, that no one deserved violence. But in Willows Creek, the loudest voices always drowned out the quiet ones. When I went to pick up Ethan from the hospital, 2 men at the front desk muttered loud enough for me to hear, "Should have finished the job." I turned so fast my vision blurred. "Say that again." The bigger one smirked. "You heard me." My fists curled, rage burning hot in my chest. But Ethan's hand on my arm stopped me. He was pale, tired, but his voice was steady. "Don't," he whispered. "That's what they want." And God help me, I listened. Back home, things got harder. The spray paint on my garage was replaced twice more, no matter how many times I scrubbed it clean. Neighbors stopped waving. At the diner, the waitress who used to refill my coffee with a smile now set the pot down like she couldn't stand to touch my cup. I'd lived in Willows Creek my whole life, but I'd never felt like such a stranger until I chose Ethan. And yet every night, when the world felt unbearable, Ethan pulled me back, his hand on my back, his voice in the dark, his stubborn way of making me laugh even when all I wanted to do was break. One night, as we sat on the porch swing, he said, "You don't have to stay, you know. We could go. Get out of this town. Start fresh somewhere they don't know our names." The thought was tempting. God, was it tempting? But leaving felt like another kind of loss. "My mom's here," I whispered. "She's buried here. This is still home." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he kissed the side of my head and murmured, "Then we'll make it home. Together." But the town wasn't ready to let us breathe. A week later, Pastor Graham called a special service. Flyers went up around town, painted in bold letters about morality, purity, protecting the youth. I knew what it was really about. Everyone did. That night, the church was packed. More people than I'd ever seen. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of hate. A few came out of fear. Ethan and I sat in the very back, our hands hidden in the shadows between us. The pastor stepped up to the pulpit, his voice booming. "Our community is under attack. Sin walks among us, flaunting itself in the open. The devil preys on the weak, twisting grief, twisting love, until what is unnatural looks righteous." Gasps rippled through the pews. Eyes turned toward us. My chest burned. He went on, louder now, his voice shaking with fire. "We cannot allow this sickness to spread. We must stand firm. We must protect our children, our families, our future." The crowd erupted clapping, shouting, amens bouncing off the walls. And that was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I stood, My voice cut through the noise before I even realized what I was doing. You call yourself a man of God. The room went dead silent. Every eye turned to me, but I didn't care. My whole body shook, but my voice didn't falter. My mother believed in kindness. She believed God was love. If she were here, she'd be ashamed of this, ashamed of you. You don't preach love. You preach fear. You preach hate. A murmur started, growing louder, angrier. The pastor's face flushed red. But I didn't stop. You talk about protecting families. Ethan is my family. He's the only person who's held me together since I buried my mom. And if you think I'm going to let you, or anyone else, tear that away, you're wrong. Gasps, shouts, angry voices rising like a storm. But beneath it, I heard something else. Clapping. Soft, hesitant at first, then louder. I turned and saw Mrs. Jenkins, gray-haired, kind-eyed, standing and applauding. Then another. Then another. Not many. Not enough. But some. Ethan stood beside me, his hand finding mine. And for the first time, we didn't hide. We walked out of that church together, our fingers interlaced, the sound of cheers and jeers chasing us into the night. Outside, under the streetlight, Ethan stopped and turned to me. His eyes glistened, but his smile was steady. You were brilliant in there. I shook my head, still trembling. I was terrified. He leaned in, kissed me soft, slow, right there on the church steps. That's what makes it brave. For a moment, the world melted away. It was just us, the two of us against everything. And somehow, that felt like enough. But the fight wasn't over. The next morning, someone shattered our mailbox with a baseball bat. A dead bird was left on the porch, feathers matted with blood. A note pinned to its wing, leave, or else. Ethan wanted to call the sheriff. But we both knew how that would go. The sheriff had been sitting in the front pew last night, nodding along with every word of the pastor's sermon. So instead, we painted the mailbox again. We swept the porch clean. And we carried on. Because love, we decided, was louder than fear. Still, nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long we could keep this up. How long before they broke us? How long before Ethan finally decided it wasn't worth it? One night, I whispered the question I'd been too scared to ask. Do you ever regret coming back? Ethan was quiet for a long time. I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep. But then his hand slid across the sheets, finding mine. Every time they hurt us, he said softly, I ask myself that. And every time, I look at you, and the answer's no. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. Why? He turned to me, eyes shining in the dark. Because loving you feels more like home than any place I've ever been. And just like that, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Not without him. But fate wasn't done testing us. 2 nights later, the fire started. I woke to the smell of smoke, the crackle of flames against wood. Panic surged through me as I shook Ethan awake. We stumbled out of bed, coughing, choking, the world glowing orange around us. The garage was ablaze, flames licking higher by the second. The heat was unbearable, smoke thick in the air. We grabbed buckets, hoses, anything we could find. But the fire was too strong, too fast. By the time the fire truck arrived, the garage was gone, the house scarred but standing, and painted across the driveway, scrawled in soot and ash, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. God hates you. Ethan pulled me close, his arms tight around me, even as the firemen shouted orders, even as neighbors stood at the curb whispering. I buried my face in his chest, the world spinning. How much more can we take? I choked. He kissed my hair, his voice steady despite the flames still smoldering behind us. As much as it takes, he whispered, until they learn they can't burn love out of us. And in that moment, broken and terrified and standing in the ruins of my home, I believed him, because love wasn't just surviving anymore. It was fighting back. The fire left scars you could see and scars you couldn't. The garage was a skeleton of charred beams, blackened rubble strewn across the driveway. The smell of smoke clung to everything, me clothes, the curtains, even my skin. I thought it would never leave. Neighbors gathered that morning, some out of curiosity, others out of guilt, and a few with genuine concern. Mrs. Jenkins brought a plate of muffins, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. Mr. Callahan stood with his arms crossed, muttering about God's justice. The sheriff, red-faced and tired, scribbled notes without once looking me in the eye. It's arson, I said, voice hoarse from the smoke. He nodded. Maybe. Hard to prove. Could have been an accident. An accident. My laugh was sharp, bitter. They left us a message in ash. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. We'll look into it. We both knew what that meant. Nothing. When they finally left, when the last curious neighbor drifted away, I collapsed on the porch steps. My hands shook as I stared at the wreckage. It wasn't just the garage they'd burned. It was safety. It was the illusion that maybe, somehow, we could just keep our heads down and survive. Ethan sat beside me, silent. His arm brushed mine, grounding me in the middle of the wreckage. After a long time, he whispered, "We can't keep living like this." I turned to him, throat tight. "So what? We run." His eyes met mine, blue, steady, fierce. "No, we fight." The days that followed were a blur of rebuilding and reckoning. Volunteers came, people I never expected. Mrs. Jenkins, yes, but also a few younger faces from the diner. Kids who had grown up hearing the same sermons but were starting to question them. They brought tools, paint, even money. Not everyone approved. Some muttered as they passed. Others crossed the street rather than walk near the ruins. A group of men drove by one afternoon, yelling slurs from their truck windows. But for the first time, I realized something important. The whole town wasn't against us. There were cracks in the wall. Small ones, but real. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan and I painted the side of the garage together. The boards were still raw, but fresh. The smell of new wood replacing the stink of smoke. "You know what we should do?" Ethan said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "What?" "Paint something they can't erase." Before I could ask, he dipped his brush in the brightest blue we had and began to scrawl across the wall. Big, bold letters. "Love is stronger." I laughed, nervous but giddy, and grabbed another brush. Together, we filled the wall with color hearts, stars, words we'd been too scared to say out loud. By the time we were done, the garage looked less like a wound and more like a banner. "Now let them come," Ethan said, stepping back to admire our work. "They can burn buildings, but they can't burn this." But hate doesn't surrender quietly. The following Sunday, Pastor Graham doubled down. From the pulpit, he called us an infection, a plague. He urged parents to boycott any business that supported us. He told the congregation that those who stood with us were standing against God. The divide in the town deepened. Some neighbors stopped speaking to Mrs. Jenkins after she brought us food. The young waitress at the diner who smiled at me one morning was scolded loudly by her manager. Even kids in the high school were pulled into it, taunted in the hallways for defending us, praised for mocking us. It was no longer just about me and Ethan. It was about everyone who dared to show us kindness. And that, more than anything, made my blood boil. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with Ethan, the glow of a single lamp between us. My hands were clenched, my chest tight. I can't let them keep doing this, I said. Not just to us, but to everyone else. They're punishing anyone who cares about us. Ethan studied me, quiet. What are you saying? I swallowed hard, fear rising like bile. I'm saying maybe it's time we stop hiding. Really stop. Tell our story. Speak out. Not just in church, but everywhere. Make it so they can't ignore us. His eyes widened slightly. Michael, if we do that, they'll come at us harder. They already are. I snapped. Then softer, broken. What more can they take? For a long time, Ethan said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at his lips. You sound like a man who's ready to burn the whole damn script and write a new one. I met his gaze, my heart pounding. With you, I am. The chance came sooner than expected. A journalist from a nearby city heard about the fire and the mural we'd painted on the garage. She called, asking if we'd be willing to talk. My first instinct was to say no. But Ethan put his hand on mine, steady and warm, and whispered, yes. So we told her everything. The funeral, the whispers, the spray paint, the fire. We told her about Willows Creek, about the church, about the hate. But more than that, we told her about love, about grief, about finding hope in each other when everything else was ashes. The article came out a week later. It wasn't just in the city paper, it spread online. Shared and reshared until strangers were sending us letters, emails, even money to help rebuild. And the town of Willows Creek couldn't ignore it anymore. Some were furious. Pastor Graham called it a smear campaign. Others were embarrassed, suddenly aware that their silence had made them complicit. And some, God bless them, stood a little taller, a little braver, whispering words of support they'd never dared to say aloud before. For the first time, felt like maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. But tides don't turn without storms. One evening, as Ethan and I walked through town, we were stopped by 3 men outside the hardware store. They blocked the sidewalk, eyes hard, fists clenched. You think you're heroes now? One sneered. Think you can shame us with your lies? My pulse pounded, but I stood my ground. We didn't lie. We just told the truth. His lip curled. Truth don't change what you are. Before I could answer, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady. You're right. It doesn't change what we are. And thank God for that. The man's face twisted in rage. He shoved Ethan hard, nearly knocking him to the ground. My blood surged hot, but before I could react, a voice cut through the tension. Enough. It was Mrs. Jenkins. She stood across the street, her frail frame trembling, but her voice carried like thunder. Leave those boys alone. Others appeared behind her, young people, older neighbors, even the waitress from the diner. One by one, they stepped closer, forming a wall between us and the men. For the first time, it wasn't just us standing alone. The men cursed, spat, but eventually backed down, retreating into the shadows. I turned to the crowd, stunned. And there, in the middle of it, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Hope. That night, Ethan and I sat on the porch, the mural glowing in the moonlight. "Do you see it?" I whispered. "See what?" he asked. "The cracks in the wall. They're widening." He smiled, pulling me close. "Good. Let's tear the whole damn thing down." And as his lips brushed mine, soft and certain, I realized something I'd been too afraid to believe. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were changing things. The months that followed were like walking a tightrope, every step uncertain, every breeze threatening to send us tumbling. But with each passing week, more people began to reach for the rope, steadying it, steadying us. The mural on the garage became a kind of landmark. Teenagers from nearby towns came to take pictures in front of it. Strangers left flowers, candles, notes tucked under the peeling paint. Some messages were shaky, scrawled in rushed handwriting. "Thank you for being brave. You give me hope." I thought I was the only one. The weight of it was overwhelming. These weren't just words. They were lives. People who, like us, had felt small and invisible, suddenly realizing they weren't alone. Ethan held the letters like treasure. I saw him read them late at night, when he thought I was asleep. His shoulders would tremble, his lips moving silently as if whispering prayers to the strangers who'd written them. For the first time since Mark's funeral, I felt the heavy stone of guilt lift from my chest. Maybe his death hadn't been in vain. Maybe love really could grow from ashes. But not everyone agreed. Pastor Graham doubled down, his sermons growing sharper, angrier. He accused us of poisoning the town, of bringing shame upon the faithful. He warned that the Lord's judgment was near. And while some of his flock began to slip quietly away, others clung tighter, their hatred sharpened into knives. One Sunday, as Ethan and I walked past the church, we found the mural defaced again. Black paint slashed across the words, dripping like blood. Sin. Abomination. Ethan's face hardened, jaw set. Without a word, he fetched buckets of water and scrubbed until his hands bled. I joined him, each stroke of the rag a vow. When the black faded, we repainted brighter this time, bigger. Love is stronger became love is stronger than hate. The next day, kids from the high school showed up with brushes and paint cans. Together, they covered the whole garage in a riot of colors, rainbows, suns, constellations, even a clumsy but heartfelt portrait of Ethan and me holding hands. It was no longer just our wall. It was everyone's. And then came the town meeting. The mayor, worn down by the growing conflict, called for a gathering at the high school auditorium. The whole town was there, packed shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with tension. Pastor Graham stood at the front, his Bible clutched like a weapon. "This is not about hate," he thundered. "It is about righteousness, about protecting our children. We cannot allow this perversion to redefine who we are." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. My stomach twisted. Then Mrs. Jenkins rose, her voice shaking but fierce. "Protect our children." From what? From love. From kindness. "My grandson died in that fire 2 years ago. Pastor, you preached at his funeral. You told us God was love. Tell Muhat part of this looks like love to you." The room fell silent. One by one, others stood. The young waitress, a retired teacher, even one of the sheriff's deputies. They spoke of fairness, of compassion, of how tired they were of fear ruling their lives. Finally, Ethan squeezed my hand. His eyes asked the question his lips didn't. "Are you ready?" I nodded. My legs felt weak, but I stood. The room turned toward me, hundreds of eyes boring into mine. "My name is Michael," I began, my voice unsteady. "And this is Ethan. We never wanted to be a fight for you. We just wanted to live, to grieve, to love. We didn't ask for our garage to be burned, for our names to be spit like curses. But here we are. And I'll tell you this: if love is a crime in Willows Creek, then maybe it's not us who are lost. Maybe it's the ones who've forgotten what love is supposed to mean." The silence was thick, electric, then applause, hesitant at first, then louder, swelling into cheers. Pastor Graham's face darkened, but his voice was drowned out. For the first time, his pulpit didn't hold the room. The weeks that followed were messy. Some left the church entirely. Others dug in deeper, angrier than ever. But the balance had shifted. The sheriff finally opened an investigation into the fire. Businesses quietly lifted their boycotts. Kids walked through town holding hands without fear of being spat on. Change didn't come overnight, but it came. And through it all, Ethan and I clung to each other. One summer evening, under a sky streaked with gold, Ethan led me back to the garage. The mural gleamed in the fading light, brighter than ever. He turned to me, nervous. I'd never seen him like that. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. "Michael," he whispered, "we've been through fire, through hell, and we're still here. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this: wherever it is, I want to walk it with you." He opened his palm. Inside was a simple silver band, scuffed and imperfect. Tears blurred my vision. My throat closed, but somehow the words found their way out. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." When he slipped the ring onto my finger, the world seemed to still. There were no jeers, no sermons, no fire, just us, and the sound of our hearts beating in unison. We married quietly that autumn, not in a church, not with the pastor's blessing, but in the meadow where Mark and I used to play as children. Felt right, like stitching past pain into future hope. Friends gathered: Mrs. Jenkins, the waitress, the teenagers who had painted the garage, strangers who had once been shadows but now stood proudly beside us. We said our vows under a sky so wide it felt like God himself was listening. And when Ethan kissed me, sealing our promise, I knew we had won. Not because the town had changed completely, not because hate had vanished, but because love had endured. Because we had endured. Years later, the mural still stood, weathered but unbroken. People came from miles away to see it, to leave their own words of hope. Willows Creek was no longer just a place where hate tried to burn love out of existence. It was a place where love fought back and won. And whenever I walked past that wall, hand in hand with Ethan, I whispered a quiet prayer. For Mark. For us. For every soul still searching for light in the ashes. Love is stronger. Always. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.